Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zero Day Dispatch's inaugural dialogue series. I'm Priya, founder of Zero Day Dispatch, and I'm joined today by Rohana, our cyber policy research assistant. At Zero Day Dispatch, we are committed to creating a platform that encourages global conversations in cybersecurity and digital policy. Our mission here is to amplify voices from the global south, underrepresented communities, regions, and bring truly diverse perspectives to the forefront of these critical discussions. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to host our first expert dialogue, focusing on a recent event that has had significant global impact, the July 19, 2024 CrowdStrike update that resulted in a worldwide Windows system crash.
That's right, Priya. We've gathered a panel of distinguished experts to discuss this incident, with a particular focus on its effect in the global south. We'll be exploring the immediate impact, subsequent mitigation efforts, and long-term implications for cybersecurity in India, Kenya, and West Africa in particular. While we encourage all participants to engage actively in this dialogue, sharing their insights and asking questions, here are some housekeeping rules for the Zoom meeting. This will be an hour discussion. After this introduction, there will be 30 minutes allotted for panelists, 10 minutes each, followed by a 10-minute conversation between the panelists, with the last 15 minutes to be allocated to the audience for questions. This session is being recorded. By participating, you consent to being recorded. All attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. Only speakers and the hosts will have their video on. Attendees can keep their video off or on. Please use the chat box to submit questions. We'll address them during Q&A session at the end. We recommend using Speaker View for the best experience. This recording will be submitted to various social media outlets. It will be free of charge and for educational purposes only.
What was the CrowdStrike incident? The CrowdStrike incident in July 2024 had a significant global impact on many critical industries across the world. This incident was caused by a faulty software update from cybersecurity company CrowdStrike, an American cybersecurity technology company based in Austin, Texas. The update affected around 8.5 million Windows devices. The primary services affected were those running Falcon Sensor for Windows version 10 and above. This incident highlighted the impact of a single point of failure on businesses, as well as the risks of relying on third-party services. The worldwide financial damage has been estimated to be at least $10 billion. While several such disruptions are reported in the US and the EU, let's hear more about what occurred in the global south, in India, Kenya, and West Africa. Let me remind you of some of the disruptions, which included thousands of commercial flights being canceled, life-saving surgeries were canceled, emergency services were temporarily offline in multiple United States cities alone. In the UK, the stock exchange was impacted. Media broadcasts were disrupted. Government services in some countries were reported, with websites and emergency services being affected. Retail stores and gas stations in some countries were also affected. Rohana will now introduce our amazing panelists.
So for the introduction for our panelist, we have Desmond Israel, who's originally from Ghana, is a researcher on legal, policy, ethical, and social implications of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, global data privacy, and emerging technologies. He has over 11 years of experience in data privacy and cybersecurity. Our second panelist is Mihir Bagwe. He's from India, is the principal correspondent at the Cyber Express, where he produces content to drive thought leadership in the tech community. And finally, our last panelist is Margaret Ndungu, is a digital rights activist from Kenya and helps organizations across Africa to stay secure as a senior cybersecurity consultant. Now we're going to start our conversation and discussion. So I open the floor with Desmond starting our conversation.
Thank you, Rohana. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so you can confirm if it's visible.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Thank you very much for having me on Zero Day Dispatch to be part of this conversation. Because of limited time, I'll go straight to the point. Let me just signpost you a bit. So I'll try and touch on CrowdStrike, what happened, impact in the global south. So I'm looking just at Africa. I find I have my colleague Kenyan on the call. Maybe I'll get a little more context. And then can these also occur again? And I'll make an inference from a policy point of view and then a policy wake-up call. So July 19 July, we woke up and 8.5 million devices running Microsoft operating system have been impacted. Why does it matter? It was widely reported all across the world. BBC took it up. I had the privilege of having a conversation again concerning the global south. So take a look at this. Now, we've all heard 40 update, but the key thing here to notice is that these Falcon sensor runs on Windows operating system, making sure that CrowdStrike is able to, update its product, which is an endpoint detection and response. So on this day, this update was pushed to Microsoft operating system. Look at point 2, where the content update is now on the Falcon sensor. Running something called a channel file. Now, this channel file specifically in context is a 219 file. There's a number of these files. What it does is content validation. Pretty much try to find out based on the AI communication, detection engineers, try to find out if what is running on the system is equated to global threat intelligence and the kind of protection that CrowdStrike wants to produce. Step 3 is where that in the process of that validation, you have what you call an input parameter. So by design, the CrowdStrike agent, which is the Falcon sensor, is supposed to take 20 inputs as parameter. Unfortunately, this update that came was taking 21. From a programmatic point of view, that's very troublesome. So the system panicked, which is at point 4, it panicked, and then it went to what we call blue screen of death. Now, just to make the records, blue screen of death is a fail-safe mode from Microsoft, which basically means that if the operating system goes into a state of unknown, it is designed to safeguard itself by entering into blue screen of death. This is how come we couldn't access so many systems across the world. What was the impact on Global South? Tunisia. We had something around the aviation space in Tunisia where they experienced temporary airport disruptions there, more to do with checking and then the payment procedures. Ghana, aviation reported they were not running on the CrowdStrike, and so they did not formally reported anything there. But then an IT service company, which I personally consult to, recently just confirmed to me that they actually had an outage in their cloud services. And then Kenya, we had Airlink. Airlink is connected to Airlink in South Africa. So when Airlink in South Africa went down on their IT operations and the booking system, it did affected Kenya as well. But again, in South Africa, we had 2 banking systems going down from the ATM and the bank card point of view, which is Capitec and ABSA. ABSA. ABSA is actually the company I work for. Sorry about that. So yeah, from that impact, let's try and appreciate if this could happen again. So let me just give you a little bit of information from here. Now, for those who follow tech, you would notice that sometime in 2004, Microsoft acquired a company called Giant. And then Microsoft 2006 developed what they call the Windows Defender. Now, Windows Defender was doing very well, but it was the only solution that had access to the core of the Microsoft operating system, which technical people call the kernel. 2009, for competitive reasons, the European Commission signed an agreement with Microsoft, requesting Microsoft to give same level of access to Windows, to the Windows, just like it gives to its products to all other vendors. So CrowdStrike in this case is what you call an independent security vendor, just like McAfee in the case of 2010. So 2009 agreement signed. 2010, we had our first global outage. So this is not the first time that it is happening. The global outage in 2010 was caused by McAfee, which was another update flaw that misidentified one of Windows operating processes and then caused it to crash, causing Windows XP, which was the version at the time, to reboot. And then we had 10 years later, which is 2024, you and I are discussing CrowdStrike 40 update. The fun fact here is the CTO who was in charge of McAfee, George Kurtz, is the same CEO who is in charge of CrowdStrike. So the question you want to ask yourself, can it really happen again? Well, your guess is as good as mine. 2010, it happened. 14 years later, it's happening again. And so there's nothing that stops it from happening, especially when the 2009 competition agreement between the European Commission and Microsoft still subsists. So let me take you next. Let me make a few inferences from here, which are quite relevant to our conversation. So whenever there's a global outage, you can look at two issues, which the PR and the technical reports and the incident reports do not really capture. Two issues. The first one is always has to do with the software development lifecycle governance. To the extent that they were able to, run this product and get it into live and the world could feel the impact, brings to the question whether these products were not even tested in the environment in the first place. Because every serious person who knows that this software development lifecycle goes through knows that definitely there has to be testing and this has to be picked up. Unfortunately not, it was not. And then of course, change management issues. So in this case, I capture as a change management failures. That feeds into the global outages. And then it brings me two issues. One on my right, which is the direct impact, that is the liability of harm. Now, we on the global south, especially in Africa, we cut off because when it comes to suing for these things, the limited liability nature of global giants in their terms and conditions and their endpoint user license agreement and the likes makes it very difficult for you to step up and then take action against them. Moreover, you might be asking yourself questions like, how about our courts and our administrative bodies? Do they have, are they well placed to take advantage of some of these things? How do we interpret it? And then you have challenges with attribution. If this was to happen with the hospital and there should be death out of this outage, who is the deceased estate going to sue? The hospital, the service provider of the hospital, the managed service provider of the service provider, or the independent security vendor of the managed service provider, or who else? Is it going to be a country-based kind of litigation? You are cut off from there. So even on the liability of harm, we barely can do anything. And then when it comes to class actions and investor lawsuits, it's always about the bottom line. Those who are on the Wall Street are the ones able to make claims for some of these global outages because it has affected their bottom line, which is their investment. But for people who really experience, flight cut off, missing appointments, missing job opportunities based on these cut off, and sometimes even crucial engagements like things that could lead to death, barely get anything when there's a liability of harm. On your right is the indirect, which is something that I've been looking at for a while now. It's techno-colonialism. And whenever you have global outages like this, it really manifests that, tech colonialism, which pretty much, spreads out for you to realize that we have so much digital dependency on the West and the solutions from the West. We have so much exploitation from that data front. There's potential loss of sovereignty when it comes to the use of data and data exploitation. And obviously, unequal benefits from technology exclusion. Let me just wrap up quickly so my colleagues get the opportunity to speak. On the policy wake-up front, I propose 4 policies from the regional and continental level. The first issue I see is oversight, right? We have a problem with our technology apps. So we need to establish task forces and that are able to collaborate to be able to offer this global governance and deal with these global giants at that level. They are huge institutions, well-funded, and it doesn't take one company to have a very consistent, coherent conversation on things that affect continental and global level. The second point has to do with access. Now, the unequal access to digital infrastructure is a problem. I think it's about time development agencies and our side of town, as in Africa, begin to look at how we collaborate to develop more resilient national infrastructure rather than just ticking the box as inclusive. We need to really look at the actual work on the ground. The last 2 points is collaboration. We haven't done too well with that. We need to have a regional collaboration on technology so that the AU and other regional bodies, will be able to push for what I call collective bargaining power and negotiation when it comes to global giants, the solutions they sell to us to implement on critical national infrastructure. And finally, we as a people need to invest into the space. We need to invest in locally built solutions and make sure that we are able to leverage on that. And I know these cuts across as well, but I'll end up here and maybe take questions after and also make further input. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. Our next speaker is Mihir Bagwe from India. He's the principal correspondent at the Cyber Express. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Priya, and thanks, Desmond. I think you really well rounded off and gave us the technical information and technical aspects of the CrowdStrike outage. So it makes my job easier because basically I am having a perspective about this incident from a journalistic point of view. So things that unwrapped on that particular day. Let me just tell you, I was literally in my pajamas when this thing happened, and I got a emergency call from one of the biggest editorial houses in India, asking me to just give my thoughts about what is happening because no one really knew what exactly was happening. Their own systems were down. Imagine a publication house that has like around 100 million subscribers in India. So yeah, I assembled the team, got into it. Like you mentioned, got a first-hand information about what was going on and what the issues were. But let me tell you, it was chaos. I always remember this thing from my school teachers that there is always chaos in the classroom, and it seems like a fish market. It literally was a fish market that particular day, be it on airport or in offices, because no one really knew what was happening. And to give you a gist, overall 8.5 million devices were impacted globally. Out of that, 2 million devices alone in India were impacted. So that's like 1 in 4 devices. In short, if you do the math, Microsoft claims to have like 10,000 companies in India which uses its services. So that's like 200 devices per company. The most impact that was felt was basically the railroad and the air, air transport. I wouldn't say that air transport was impacted. The systems were impacted to an extent that was expected. Surprisingly, we had BCPs in place. It's a funny thing because in the remotest parts of India, apparently they face such issues. Electricity is turned down. There are no generators at times. So they do this manually. The ticketing system in India is usually done manually, even for airports. So they knew what needed to be done. It took time. Yes, there was an impact. There were 300 flights from multiple airlines that were cancelled that particular day. But this wasn't because they did not have a BCP. It was basically because it was taking time to do these things manually. But the most surprising of the lot is the railway system. The railway system was not impacted a bit. And people wanted to know why, because everything was down, nothing was functioning, everything was running late, off schedule. But the railway system was functioning to the T. Um, the biggest reason behind that was a bug called Y2K. So back in the day, when Y2K bug happened, India decided to have a system that is not that dependent on uh, any of the vulnerable operating systems that are used commonly. So we developed a system called CRIS. It's basically Central Railway Information System, but they take care of different things. It's not just the ticketing system, but they also do that for digital payments and most importantly, the train traffic control. We do not have any systems that use Microsoft operating systems for that. It is basically very highly air-gapped system. And it was, as I said, was designed because we faced issues due to the Y2K bug. Similar thing for air traffic as well. We do not have systems that were based on Microsoft operating system as such. But most of the systems were affected in a way where the screens, the departure and arrival screens are there. They were not functioning. They used the thing. Train systems also. We do not have any other operating systems for train ticketing and train rostering as well. So that was completely air-gapped, and we kind of survived the scare. I'm saying survived the scare because India has the second largest passenger footfall everyday basis, just behind China. So nothing went down on that basis, on that front. Healthcare was also impacted, but healthcare was impacted on when it comes to private sector, not the public sector. I say that with a pinch of salt because the public sector is unfortunately not completely running on electronic things. We do not have a medical record system that is maintained electronically. We do not have prescription systems that are maintained electronically. For that matter, I know I went to my pharmacy to check because I wanted to know. We were doing a story. Mind you, we did like 6 to 7 stories that particular day within like 6 to 7 hours. And I wanted to know the impact on the ground level. So I went to my pharmacy and checked over there. He said, we are operating. We have Microsoft, but we are operating. And that was like really surprising for me as well. I, I was like, the entire world is down. Why are you still not facing this issue? And he was like, we have Microsoft Windows XP, which was basically taken off 5 years back, but we still have those systems running. It is not connected over the internet. We do not have any updates coming in. We do not have anything. So I was very curious, like the software still need updates, over the air updates. And he said, no, we do not have over the air updates. We have updates that are done manually. And that is why we are not really feeling the impact of this. So the healthcare also to a certain level survived the scare. Uh, it was a little bit bad when it came to the private sector because yes, we have mega hospitals and all of that, which basically impacted their surgeries and this and that. But when it comes to the public sector, we had very nominal impact. We did not really have those things. We do everything on pen and paper, even till date. So even if you go to the biggest of medical centers, which is AIMS, considered to be one of the top 10 healthcare centers in Asia, that is also running basically on pen and paper. So they all had a backup plan. And it was very surprising for me because considering the fact that, the gravity of the situation, this could have gone really bad, but it did not. And that was something that was really, really surprising. But at the same time, there's this balance that we had. Fortunately, we had where we were not completely dependent. We were dependent to a certain extent, but we were not completely dependent. And probably going forward, I think that is something that the entire world probably needs to take into consideration. We cannot be dependent completely on digital records, especially I cover cyber warfare, and we have so many data breaches related to healthcare, so many data breaches related to Star Healthcare. Just today, their data is up for sale. So I think we need to draw a line. There are issues when it comes to all of that. And yeah, I mean, dependency is there, but we need to have a balance. That's what I have taken away from this particular thing. So yeah, I'll give others some time to share their thoughts as well. And I am curious to ask a few questions to Desmond as well. I think I've not had a great, technical kind of discussion with anyone, and I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Mihir, for your brief discussion on this insight. Now we're gonna give our floor to Margaret for her discussion on the CrowdStrike incident.
Thank you, Hannah. So for Kenya, maybe what I'd like to say is it was an outage that spoke to, I guess globally as well, to the resilience and the business continuity of organizations, yeah. So for my region, for Kenya, the industries that were affected were transport and the financial sector and telecommunications sector. However, what you'll find is, I think only the transport sector had organizations, issue notice, public notice, telling their customers that there's gonna be a slow service or they're having an outage. And an example is Kenya's major airline, Kenya Airways. I think they're the only ones who issued a public notice, and they warned their customers that they're having an outage and that there'd be slow service, yeah? So when it comes to the rest of the sectors, the financial and telecommunications sector, there was no public information or reports of whether organizations were affected. However, this is not a new thing within this region. There's quite a bit of a hush culture prevalent in the region with regards to reporting incidences. And many people could attribute it to the fear of the regulator's wrath, yeah. Which speaks to a whole other issue of non-reporting. And well, I think I might go down a rabbit hole of the regulatory occurrences or issues within this area. But the danger with that is, with that culture, is that it can grow into having non-accountable organizations, yeah, which impacts how citizens receive services and the security of citizens, especially in cases where there's data breaches, which we've seen before. So for the CrowdStrike outage, that was that's a summary of how it, what the outlook was within Kenya. So minimal reporting, traffic sector was definitely affected. Kenya's major airline, Kenya Airways, was impacted and was public. I think that's what I'd like to highlight with regards to the outage. So I'll let Johanna cue us into the next to the next section, and I look forward to hearing the questions and also asking questions as well from everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for your discussion as well. Now, what I think is the most exciting part of this panel is the conversation between panelists and each other. So I'm leaving the floor open to our three panelists in terms of the questions that they would want to ask each other in regards to this CrowdStrike incident that occurred.
Well, I'll dive in first. So one question, and this question I've literally asked everyone that I've spoken to, Desmond. This is basically for you to start with. So CrowdStrike event happened because there was kernel level access for CrowdStrike, right? What do you think about it? Does a CTI company, cyber threat intelligence company, need kernel level access? Is that really required? Because these kind of incidents can happen. We have multiple vendors when it comes to CTI. So what do you think? Like, is it time to restrict some access to kernel of your computer, of your operating system, or you can do away with that? What are your thoughts about that?
All right, so I think that it's about time Microsoft start to look at the design if they still want to implement these competitive agreements to allow independent ISVs to come in. My thought process is that there should be some level of sandboxing around the kernel for all these third-party solutions that need to still access the kernel. The problem with denying them access to the kernel will throw us back to the same conversation about competitiveness, because the Microsoft operating system is actually, split up into two if you do all the technical breakdown. There's the unprivileged part, which is the user access that you and I, normally play around, including administrative rights. And then there is the kernel mode access, or the privileged access, which gives you access to ring zero of the operating system. So that ring zero is just codename ring zero, because that is where all the privileged operating system transactions happen. And so for a threat intelligence to be able to, use the word loosely, advise the operating system that, hey, there's a threat coming, you need to update yourself and do this and do that, it would be best practice to do it at the most privileged level of the operating system. So if you look at the technical requirement of it, it makes sense for the 2009 agreement that the European Commission signed with Microsoft, because then it gives everybody a level playing field to be able to offer, top level security solutions. Hitherto, Microsoft would just be unnecessarily, one-man monopoly, because it would seem to you like they are the one giving you the best solution, when indeed they might not be giving you the best solution, because they just have core access to their own operating system. But it brings us back to this issue, and I've made the point already through my slides. It happened in 2010. 14 years later, it's happening again. What's the probability that it's not going to happen next year? So I seriously think that the conversation around sandboxing the kernel portions to allow ISVs to tunnel through and still do what they have to do, but then when there is a break, we will not have this sort of impact, must be discussed. If from the technical design of the kernel, it is not possible, which I doubt, because we've been able to do so much with technology, I don't want to believe that we cannot research and design into sandboxing kernel level interactions. But if that is the case, for whatever reason, maybe from costs, maybe from geopolitics, whatever it is, we can't do it, then we need to review how ISVs are accessing our operating system and doing third-party changes.
Do you think that something like SBOM would help knowing who all are accessing our systems? Because that is the basis of SBOM, right? Software bill of materials, where you want to know which companies are accessing certain parts of your systems. So do you think?
Well, the truth of the matter is, it is just that I did a presentation just a few days ago on this same concept, but from a different perspective, where I discussed it in the context of zero trust. And I said that access to ISVs on your operating system is actually blind trust in your zero trust. You've assumed that these guys will do the best practice. I made another case in my presentation that if you look at it from, the what you call a regular operation of these things, if you look at it from that point of view, i.e. governance, the software development lifecycle governance is breached. Change management governance is breached, because how do you develop a software and it goes live before we realize that there's a problem with it? It has to go through a lab. It has to go through testing. Someone needs to have picked it up. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. We are not going to beat them over that. But the point is, we already know who is having kernel access to our operating system. We do. Yep. All the EDRs we are running, the MDRs we are running, most of the independent security vendor softwares we run on our operating system, they have kernel mode access because they need to do updates at that level. The problem needs to come to the table, the designs, the design side of things, and also the governance side of things. Because Microsoft or whoever it is who's the dominant player, whose platform will be running some of these things, needs to have the leverage where they know what is coming in. They have a say as to the software development lifecycle process at the point that is being committed, into the operating system. They need to have a way of doing whether on automated validation, so that, like I said, a sandbox that checks it, and then if it breaks, it keeps it in the sandbox, and we have our lives intact.
Excellent. I think that's a very valid point you make. So really appreciate your answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for Margaret, too, moving from the technical aspect of the outage towards, what happened down there in Kenya. For us over here in India, especially, we are struggling with our data privacy bills and regulations, How is it in Kenya? Like for us at this point of time, like Desmond mentioned in his presentation as well, we have faced issues. We have had certain losses that as users, as end users, whatever we have faced, we cannot really go to these tech giants and sue them at this point of time, at least in this country, in this part of world. How's the things in Kenya? I would like to know about that. Do you have any regulations up there where you can pull up these tech giants for whatever misdemeanors have happened and whatever losses have happened to end users, especially the end users? I'm not talking about B2B like businesses. I'm talking about end users.
That's a good question. Thank you for that. So we do have very active, that would also be read as strict regulators within, and especially the focus areas are normally the financial sector, the telecommunication sector. So you mentioned data privacy. We do have a very active regulator who has been to court with many organizations. I think there's always a case every week, which is a good thing with regards to respecting privacy of the citizens. However, on the corporate side, I think it makes them scared of the regulator, which is why you never hear or you never see public reporting of, for example, data breaches. So they happen. And this is even on the public forum. You can Google it. There are public or government agencies that have had data breaches, and they just won't report it. The data is on the dark web, so you'll see it there, but they just don't report it. So there's that extreme. And then there's also general consensus of feelings that the regulators could be a bit strict, and they'd want a bit more, leeway to, for example, report within several days or a week. I think our reporting deadlines are within 72 hours. Yeah. So it does raise a question on how can the regulators, or what can we do, or what can the regulators do to improve the culture of reporting and improve accountability, because it's quite a danger if we go down a culture of not having non-accountable organizations. Yeah. So I think from my standpoint, what I'd raise is just to have them encourage transparency, maybe increase or create incentives such as liability protections for companies that voluntarily report incidences. So that could be one way. They could also strengthen oversight by providing the necessary skill sets that are needed by these organizations with regards to how they report and how they recover from these incidences. So those are just some of the ways maybe we could discuss on what other ways on how regulators can end this culture. Yeah, I think that's what I'd add, Mihir. I'm not sure if anyone else has something to add with regards to that topic. Yeah.
So again, Margaret, so I reckon that once we have data protection laws, it comes with breach notification requirements. But I haven't practiced data protection for a while. I also know that unless personal data is involved, the regulated entity is not really mandated to report it. Now, what happened with CrowdStrike is not more of a data breach. It was more of an IT outage. It's not even a cyber security attack. It's not a cyber attack. But if you put it in the context of cyber security, to the extent that systems were not available, that is an incident. So it brings me to the question, and that goes for both Margaret and Mihir. Do you have like incident reporting requirements, from maybe a legislative point of view? Do you have like incident reporting requirements apart from data protection laws, which will require for breach notification requirements?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have it in India. I'm sorry, Margaret. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have it. We have only breach reporting laws in place. It's a very tight window, and I don't know who thought about it. It's a 6-hour window, but that is for specifically only for data breaches. It's nothing related to, downtimes or XYZ things. Even if there's an internet outage, you do not have any kind of mechanism to, report it or say that, hey, my business is suffering because of this. I need answers. And these are government vendors we are talking about. These are the internet service providers, ISPs, which are government vendors, and they have downtimes as well. And businesses suffer, they bleed, but we do not have really any laws for that. We don't have any governance when it comes to incidents, anything apart from breaches. So breach notifications are the only things that too. It is not a very public. It's given to a particular regulator, and
Regulators.
it is behind closed doors. We don't have anything like SEC. When you do an SEC filing, you come to know that, hey, this incident has happened. We do not have. The transparency is lacking. A. B. We don't have any governance apart from breach notifications. So it's really bad.
All right. I have a general reaction, but I would like to hear Margaret too before.
Yeah, thank you, Desmond. And also thank you for highlighting that this was not a cybersecurity incident per se, it was an outage. But how organizations respond in this kind of incidences also speaks to how they will respond to future major cybersecurity incidents.
I agree with you.
Which is why the regulator conversation came up. Yes, so I think that's what I'd say to that. So when you watch how they respond or how they're very hush-hush about things, it tells you of how they'll speak or how they'll respond when we have major incidences. So I think that's what I'd add to that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So my general view, well, I have to answer whether it's the same in my country. Fortunately, we have breach notification laws for data privacy. And then under our Cybersecurity Act, we also have, notification requirements for incidents that actually causes, the disruption of services. But this is limited to what they call the critical information infrastructure. And so if your industry is not necessarily gazetted to fall within that, then it means you are not going to report. I want to believe that is why my client didn't report their incident, because I found out later that one of my clients did have the CrowdStrike incident in their environment against their cloud services, but they did not report that, obviously maybe because they don't fall within any of the critical infrastructure. And my general view about all these notification laws is that I think it's worked better in environments where the regulator has created more strategic guidelines and made a case for why the regulated entities must report it. Now, in the US, CISA and all these other agencies managed to build the intelligence of the US based on this information. So they don't take it lightly when these things happen and you don't disclose them, because for them, as we speak, cybersecurity is at the core of national security, And so if you're not reporting these things, it's basically you're saying that you are one entity out of the many entities of the United States who want to side with adversary, so you are then forced to come out and, make some sort of declaration, and they provide guidelines as to how these things are supposed to be done. So they are not having it any easy, but if you compare it to maybe most of the global South, especially in Africa, we are barely thinking about, okay, breach incident notification. What exactly am I supposed to report? And how am I supposed to report it? And if I'm reporting it, what is the probability that it's not going to affect my brand reputation? What if I report it and my competitor doesn't report it, but then mine is published and my clients decide to go to my competitor because they sort of see them as more competent? So it's an issue that I think that the conversation should go straight to policymakers and industry. Industry forums should be having this conversation with policymakers and get us to the point where there's a clear direction as to what is an incident in the context of the regulatory environment. And, how do we report it, to what extent, and what safeguards do we get when we do these sort of reports? So that's like my general feedback on that.
Yeah, I think it's great to know firstly that you have a cybersecurity act where you are actually wanted to report these things. India also has a critical infrastructure kind of reporting thing which is mandatory for them. But again, I feel that it's not just critical infrastructure, and critical infrastructure, the definition is so broad. It basically encapsulates everything. Also, it encapsulates nothing. So it's a kind of a dicey, blurred line if you say as such. Whereas in US, as you mentioned, CISA has very clear guidance. There are 16 sectors which are basically critical infrastructure, and they come under certain laws, and the rest of the companies also come under certain different laws. I think one thing that I feel is that we cannot have blanket rule for everyone, but
No.
it needs to be mandated for not just like data breach reporting or anything, but incidences where probably the company is suffering for maybe 24 hours or 48 hours, and that is having an impact on not just the end users, but also like a revenue basis as well. I mean, everyone gets impacted. Imagine a manufacturing unit, or even say, for that matter, the airlines, they were impacted during this thing, and there was a lag of 3 hours. We faced 3 hours. The flights took 3 hours to fly out. But when these kind of things happen, I think there needs to be a reporting system for this as well, and that needs to come under law. Because unless and until you are obligated under a certain law, I think people don't take it very seriously. And as you mentioned, reputation is at stakes, right? So you don't want to come out with it. And there needs to be repercussions for people who don't report it either. So I think that's a very valid point. We need to have more reporting around this, not just breach notifications. I have always kind of argued on this thing that it's not just breach notifications. We need laws where downtimes need to be reported as well, because they do have a broader impact. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for all your questions. I don't see any messages from the audience in the chat, any questions. So I guess I'll just ask the next question. Desmond had mentioned, a factor that is, I think, very important regarding collaboration, particularly, from the policy side, is so. And I'll ask this question to all three of you because I think it pertains to all three different parts of the world and regions. Is what does regional collaboration look like? And on technology, particularly, with collective power sharing, what does that look like?
So if I get the question, what does regional collaboration look like, right? Okay. So regional collaboration, so from the African context, you can look at it from the economic bloc. So you can say ECOWAS, you can say COMISA for the East African friends, SADC for those in the southern part of it, and then we have the northern side of Africa. So from an economic bloc perspective, you can always have that level of collaboration. Now, one of the key things I can also discuss, even from an entire continental collaboration point of view, which is from the African Union, we have what we call the African Continental Free Trade. Now, this is supposed to kind of like help us, integrate trade amongst ourselves. And the funny thing is, right after the Continental Free Trade was passed, we realized that we missed the digital economy part of our lives. So a protocol was passed. And if you study the documents, both the main Continental Free Trade Agreement and the protocol, you see the sense of conversation about trying to build our economy, our national economies on the digital front. We want to deal with the cross-border data transfer, right? This goes to the root of infrastructure. We cannot have this conversation if we don't have proper blocks to hold our digital infrastructure. Now, so the regional collaboration comes in here. How are our undersea cables, for instance, connected? You know, is it easy for Ghana to have a conversation with, say, Cote d'Ivoire, where we have some of our landing sites, you know, for redundancy purposes? Is it easy for us to have an African-wide data center? What does it look like for us who wants to integrate all our economies together and run it on the digital front? That is the kind of collaboration we need to look at. What is the volume of Western sold technology to Africa that will give us the opportunity to negotiate like the European Union can? Because we offer something as well. And I've heard this too many times where they say, well, Africa gives you natural resources and you go refine it. So negotiate based on your natural resources. Have that conversation. The value proposition on the table should be that part of the things we want to get if we are giving out our natural resources is to enhance technology, enhance infrastructure, have capacity building, knowledge transfer, etc., etc. So that is the kind of communication we should be having. That's the kind of collaboration we should be having. We are receiving solutions. We are receiving technology, you know, all around. Can we decide as Africa that, listen, this is the standard of technology we want, and this is the requirements, so that governments can see these standards as modules and leverage on those modules. Today, because of the Digital Services Act in the European Union, you dare not, as even as an American company with all the financial muscle, you dare not operate within that region as though you don't care about the citizens. I just wrote a paper about the Uber and the Dutch decision, you know. And whilst I have a little reservation about the volume and even the court thought process in implementing those fines, I still feel that those regulators are taking things to tax. And this came about because of the original collaboration, which birthed them, the GDPR, the Digital Services Act, and even the EU Parliament, if we want to stretch this, you know, to the most degree. So that's where I see regional collaboration. We need to come together, whether as economic blocks or as a continental unit, looking at trying to build our economies on the digital front, and have these conversations and negotiate for technologies. Negotiate, like my friend Mihir said, what is downtime? What are we supposed to tolerate as downtime? You know, and I think that would definitely, it might not take a day, maybe in the next decade, I'll be having a different conversation if we take this path and we start to push harder on some of these arrangements. Tech giants are running like nation states. Some of them have revenues that are bigger than our GDPs. So we are not speaking about a corner store. We're speaking about people who can sit down with governments and agree to disagree. And that's what the continent needs to start looking at. Prayer.
Thank you so much, Desmond, for that answer. I'm so sorry to interrupt you here, but we do have one question from the audience. It's from Ag Pena. I hope I didn't butcher your name, so if you want to pronounce it correctly, feel free to. But the question that is here is, in the absence of regulatory reporting requirements for companies, one option available can be if SLAs contain mandatory incidents reporting requirements. Agreed? So that's the question. So I'm leaving it up to any of you to answer that.
I agree that SLAs do hold breach reporting, incident reporting. I mean, I've dealt with SLAs throughout my work, so I'm speaking from that experience. But the problem is SLAs are limited to that particular service that we are dealing with. Now, if the SLA misses anything, it's very difficult for you to go and leverage on it. For the simple reason that contracts are implemented based on what the parties engaged on. What I think would do us a lot of good is country-level frameworks that helps us to leverage on some of these SLAs. Again, most of the SLAs from global giants are standard form SLAs. I've negotiated with global giants on behalf of financial institutions. They barely will shift the goalpost and make modifications to the SLA. We always have to find very ingenious ways of getting them. If you want the money, you need to do this. And then the legal will come with all the necessary pushbacks until we get to that compromise. Point I'm making is it is not always easy to leverage on the SLA to deal with the kind of outages which is the subject of this conversation. SLAs will work perfectly for some other services, low-end services, incidents that just affect you and your organization. SLAs will work perfectly. SLAs will have a problem when we are dealing with enterprise-wide, regional-wide, global-wide impacts like CrowdStrike. So I partly agree. just so if you're looking for a direct answer, I partly agree.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
also
so much.
partly agree
Oh,
with this.
sorry. Yes, go forward, Mihir.
Yeah, just like I'll just take like a few seconds. I also partly agree with what Desmond said and you know, the SLA part of it. But as he mentioned, I also believe that there needs to be a broader framework which needs to be put in by the governments, and not, we cannot put everything on the enterprises. You know, enterprises will always try to bypass things. What works for them, what doesn't work for them, and SLAs are not foolproof for that. We need to have broader frameworks based on which these SLAs can in future be designed. So I think that's my take on this.
Yeah, just to put something in there, that was a very good question. It came to mind when Desmond was speaking about liability of harm. And it got me thinking, we need to think or acknowledge that there are small organizations that were also affected, but they don't feature in the discussions, or they don't feature in the discussions or calculations about loss because they're small and maybe the world doesn't know about them. But because they're dependent on this multinational supply chains that could also have been affected by the CrowdStrike outage, then they did suffer some loss or some outage as well. So that was a good question, and I liked what Desmond said about trying to find ways to uphold SLA requirements and negotiating better terms for these organizations. Yeah, thanks for your input.
Thank you so much for your insights. So just so keeping time in mind, I do have one last question to ask all of you. So this is more on like the the resilience level and the social adaptation level. So my question that I have to all of you is, how do you foresee society adapting to increasing frequency and sophistication of all these cyber incidents that have been occurring, right? So how can society ensure that these technologies are used responsibly to prevent rather than exacerbate them from harm? So like, what are your perspectives on that as we are being so technologically advanced, resilient? So how do we create technology resilience and have that social resilience as well? So I'm going to leave it up to any one of you to answer that question.
I'll give it a shot. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's following the conversation about AI, and a big part of it is responsible AI. And responsible AI is more to do with ethical AI. And ethical AI is more to do with develop solutions that actually, do not harm us, right? Again, if you follow the internet, by now you know that the internet was designed without security. So most of the problems we have on the internet is also based on the foundation on which the internet was designed. It was designed for efficiency. It wasn't designed for security. So that is one big part of the conversation. We as a people are looking for the convenience. And when we design these things, we are so quick to go to market with it. I don't want to mention brands, but when the AI boom of Gen AI came out, we all know who came out with the first product, which we all jumped after. And then there was all the clapback and the pushbacks, the complaint that was filed with FTC against them and all that. That is how we have behaved as a society when it comes to technology adoption. We have always run after the convenience and have failed to look at the resilience and the security aspect of these technologies that we adopt. Simple answer. Just as we are trying to do with AI, responsible AI, we might want to look at entirely what we would call responsible technology and make sure through our representation in Congress and parliaments and assemblies, we need to start having conversation that puts some sort of responsibility on the people that develop technologies to make sure that at the core of it comes this resilience that we are talking about. And I think the very good case I'll sign up on is the current conversation about security by design in the United States. Industry is pushing back. Government is saying no. And where are we getting to? We are getting to a middle ground where industry is saying, throw us the incentives, help us, meet us halfway so we can do this and do it together. So I think that is where we need to take the conversation when it comes to resilience on the technology that we use, because whether we like it or not, directly, indirectly, there's always a social impact for the use of technology.
I'll just add one line or what Desmond said, exactly ditto whatever he said. Copy paste that. I loved his answer, the response, because that is exactly what I had in my head. Just to add to it, I think we've for very long always be given priority, to convenience over security. I think it's almost time that we take everything, be it security or be it data privacy or ethical AI, everything needs to be on top of the ladder. You cannot actually have convenience over security. It should be security over convenience. I think that's my takeaway. And like, I would like to actually end with that.
Yeah, I think for me, what resonates when we talk about resilience is I think organizations are definitely going to have to be more cognizant of having stronger and resilient disaster recovery capabilities. I think it was very clear who takes disaster recovery seriously, who takes business continuity seriously. You could tell by how fast they issued notices, how fast they communicated, how fast they were able to offer alternatives for service provision for their customers. So I think that's what truly resonates with me now is, seeing organizations build their capabilities in terms of how they respond to incidences. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. Now I'm going to hand it over to Priya for our conversation.
Thank you so much. Wow, this was an incredibly enlightening discussion, and we truly appreciate everyone's valuable insights and contributions. Due to time constraints, of course, we weren't able to address all our questions or explore every aspect of this topic. However, the depth and quality of today's panelists' discussions were just remarkable. Thank you to our panelists and to everyone who joined us today. Remember, you can stay connected with Zero Day Dispatch through our newsletter, which will include all future events. And we look forward to continuing these crucial conversations. Until next time, I have attached links to our newsletter as well as our LinkedIn page. And thank you again. This was truly amazing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
so
everybody.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rohana. Closing off now. Thanks.